Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Dr. Robert Zeitlin, author of Laugh More, Yell Less, A Guide to Raising Kick-Ass Kids. Dr. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul.
How did I do in the last name?
Did great.
All right, did my best, man. Did my best. So, Robert, we're thrilled to have you. Are you ready to get started with our questions?
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Perfect. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Wow. So when I look back and think about writing the book, I think I wish I would have known that it took more work than I thought. So like going way back, I used to think I was a natural at writing, and I didn't realize that it takes work. I remember my writing teacher actually, this is freshman year of college, told me, he got me all excited. There are some people who can write their last draft the first time out, no need to edit. And I was nodding along. I was waiting for the pat on the back. And he said, no, you're not that type of writer. Your writing gets better when you revise it. And so like that was a big turning point for me. And, you know, I felt destroyed at the moment, but it was the best piece of advice I ever received. So I think it applies to nearly everyone listening. I think there's probably 5 to 10% of people that can just spin out their last draft. It's going to take some work. When I wrote this book, I had to nearly restart it from the first draft. So my advice is to get a comfortable chair and pack some snacks and prepare for a long haul.
And I love that you mentioned that, because every single person is going to be different. Some people can bust out a draft in a few days. For other people, they need more time to want to refine it, go through the process. But the thing is this, there is no set perfect system for everyone that you can just plug and play. Everyone is different, and you have to figure out the best fit for you.
Right. And figuring that out is the challenge that people should look at, rather than thinking this is a mountain to climb the book. It's actually figuring that out, because that's the goal here.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, I'm completely polar opposite. So with me personally, when it comes down to a book, I've cranked out one book in 24 hours. Typically for me, it's a 2 to 3 week process. But as I tell everyone, you know, everyone's going to be different. Me, I'm one of those people that when I get the inspiration, it just knocked the whole thing out. But that's not typical.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everyone's going to have different, and you have to trust your own process and be comfortable with that.
Exactly.
Well, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I guess it's the same. It's along the same theme. I think the biggest obstacle is inside your head.
Yeah.
You know, I think the hardest part, honestly, of getting published isn't the challenges, because you'll figure those out. Like you'll get there. You'll find the resources you need. But the hardest part is getting over the hump of that resistance that's always going to be with you in your head. You know, that resistance sort of comes hand in hand with confidence. So you have this you wake up motivated, and somehow you get to the end of the day and you're like, where did those hours go? And sometimes, you know, you're going to avoid it, but it's better to face it. So getting published, writing your first book, doing anything, you know, it gets harder the more you run away from that resistance, and they all get easier the more you learn to sort of, I call it dance with that fear. You know, I think there's a way of managing it and facing it and dealing with it. And I think that's probably the biggest obstacle.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Yeah, you know, this is a really interesting area, because I think marketing has really changed in the digital age. And as much as it's easy to propagate and send out a million things just with very low cost, I really think it's actually now all about connection. And a guru of mine, Seth Godin, talks about this connection economy all the time. But you really need to trust someone before you really buy from them, before you really enroll. And so I think the link from knowing to liking to trusting someone is one that we need to cultivate. So I didn't have a formal book launch. This was a self-published book, but I knew I wanted to get out there and talk about the book and the ideas in it. So I followed a strategy used by a fellow self-published author, a first-timer, my friend Nathaniel A. Turner. I sent out 5 free copies a week for a while to people who were in positions that could get me in front of an audience, and included a personal note. And that was probably the biggest marketing move that I made.
So you were sending out 5 books a week to different influencers. How many weeks did you do this for, and how many people did you connect with?
I kept it up for about 3 months solid, and then I sort of ran out of a large list of influencers and would sporadically send them out more often. I'd say I got out of that first 3 months probably like 4 really solid leads, and I ended up on a lot of podcasts and doing a lot of interviews and promoting it a lot. But in terms of solid leads, getting up in front of groups of people, probably four solid leads.
Got it. So did you feel the process was worth it by doing that?
I did. I feel like it began conversations and it helped me get the book out. It wasn't going to be in a bookstore window, but actually going to a local indie bookstore and doing talks, that kind of thing helped. But really making contact and reaching out to people, almost like a random act of kindness. Here's a free book. I wanted you to have this. This is something I thought might be helpful.
Now, you also mentioned that you did several book signings. So what was your process with that? Were you just going to different bookstores, introducing yourself as a local author? You like to do a sign-in? What was your process with that?
That's exactly it. I was actually working with a marketing person at the time who was helping me sort of craft how the evening would go, and we really set it up so we didn't stress the bookstore a great deal. I mean, they do a lot of author signings at these small bookstores, but setting it up and making it as easy as possible and using a lot of my social media connections to try to bring people in and to let them know this is where they can meet me, they can get the book signed, etc. And it was just a great opportunity to get in front of a smaller audience and speak sort of face to face about the things that are in the book and start a conversation around them. It was really interesting who would come out too. It wasn't always like the target market. It's really interesting to see who was interested in a book about parents that sounded less of a challenging sort of shaming process and a little bit more inspirational.
Oh, and plus you had a kick-ass title.
I did. That kick-ass title got me, I think, a few notices and then actually knocked me out of a couple opportunities. Like the first big marketing opportunity I had was a corporate gig that wanted to bring me down to a city in the South who had a parenting resource group that they did like lunch and learns with. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to buy crates of my book and they wanted me to come speak. And it was all going great until they brought the committee together, which included one lawyer. And he said, listen, this isn't a title that we can have associated with. So while I put it in there intentionally, it actually tripped me up a little in terms of those first kind of steps in the mainstream, so to speak.
Well, the thing is, with that type of book, though, with that title, the people that you're going to connect with, you're going to connect in a very powerful way. And the other ones, it might not be much of a connection, but the ones that you do connect with, I mean, it's really going to hit your target market.
Exactly. And that's one of the truisms about marketing that most people don't think. It's letting your fear talk again to sort of water things down and to make it as broadly accessible. But if you don't differentiate your market, like you just said, from the people who get it and the people who don't get it, then no one's ever really going to think it's for them. So there are people that look at this title or look at the cover of my book and say, oh, I know where he's going with this. And I think that's probably the most powerful thing you can do in marketing or spreading your message.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of books, I'd like to know what is your favorite book and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Sure. I mentioned before Seth Godin. I've been a big fan of his for a long time. His book, Linchpin, would be my favorite book. It was a little hard to narrow that down, but I would say Linchpin. His subtitle is Are You Indispensable? And it leads you really to a mindset of finding a way to make a bigger impact on the people and the organizations you work with. So the biggest thing I learned from it was, again, about the resistance and about the sort of natural fear and how it manifests in us. Because there are ways that I was sabotaging my growth and even my forward progress that I wasn't aware of until I read the way Seth put it in perspective in that book. So I thought that was a really valuable takeaway from me.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite quote is a statement by Viktor Frankl, who was the author of Man's Search for Meaning. He said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space, is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so that idea that there's a gap there that's usually untapped, that there's a gap there that represents our power, was a game changer for me. Like, for instance, I grew up, I love watching the show Bewitched when I was growing up. And I was fascinated. The lead character's power, she was a witch, to stop time when she was in a bind so she could figure out what she wanted to do next. I've always been on a search for a way to slow time down. So this idea from Frankl that we have untapped power in the gap between what happens to us and how we respond led me to learn about things like mindfulness, led me to meditation, led me ultimately to positive psychology, which is woven all through this book, Laugh More, Yell Less. So now I have more power. I have more room in my jam-packed life to write, to create. I created a video-based podcast with a partner. I gave a TED Talk and keynotes, but it all started with slowing things down and sort of manipulating time.
I love that.
Thanks.
Well, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show today. What is the best way for people to find you online?
First of all, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity and what you're doing, getting more books in front of people and giving them some information. The best way for people to find me online would be through my website, which is super.build. There's no .com. It's actually .build, super.build. Or on social media, I'm at Dr. Robert Zeitlin. Last name is spelled Zeitlin. And listeners can also find our podcast on iTunes or YouTube. You can search for I Am the Worst Parent Ever.
All right. Well, Dr. Robert, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.